What's up, Grease Monkey Nation? It's me, Neal from the Tower Climbing Grease Monkeys, and we're hitting you again on Wednesday with another live recording of our podcast, the TCGM Show. Welcome, everybody, to the show. We've got a cool topic today. We're actually going to be talking about workforce standardization, and just so happen to grab the industry expert in this particular subject matter, and his name is Tom Sutton. Tom has been around for a while now and is running one of the most successful wind energy technician training programs out of Kalamazoo Valley Community College. He's been in the automotive industry for like over 11 years, worked with Ford and did all kinds of cool stuff. This is one of the smartest guys I know. I'm trying to talk him up as much as possible. He's one of my teachers, and I've taken his courses. He's trained in GWO. He does all of the INSA stuff, and he's just overall badass. So let's just bring him on into the show. And this is for your viewing pleasure, everybody. Welcome, Tom Sutton. Tom, welcome to the TCGM Show.
Thanks, Neal. I hope I can live up to the intro.
It's well deserved, man. We've been knowing each other for a while now and following one another. And on more than one occasion, we've just been able to hang out, get to know one another. And you've taught me a bunch. And when I reached out to you last week, we just came up with this idea that we should talk to these technicians about what workforce standardization is, what you're currently doing, and what they can expect from it. But before we get into all that, man, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you've done up to this point, and what you're doing now?
Cool. So I started in wind almost 11 years ago now. I worked in Europe. I got some credentials from Europe, came back to Kalamazoo Valley Community College and established a competency-based technician training program for the entry-level technician. And what that means is that everything that technician does here, they have to demonstrate that they can actually do it at 100% correctness. And I brought that kind of a methodology with me from the auto industry and before that even in aviation, where it's one thing to say that I know how to do it and take a test, and that's really memorization, but it's a totally another level to be able to prove that you can actually do the task correctly. And so we built these programs with industry direct feedback, sending all the criteria to the industry for validation and bringing it back and assessing, teaching and assessing. And since then, we've become pretty involved with WEA, the American Wind Energy Association. I currently sit on the steering committee, working in several of the subcommittees. And really the topic of discussion today, we're involved in two ANSI standards committees. And ANSI is the American National Standards Institute, and they're an industry consensus process where, in this case, the wind industry can come together and try to put together what they can all agree on are workforce standards for what a technician should be able to do.
I think that's amazing. And the reason that I'm a big proponent for this is that I think that a lot of guys are coming in and they don't know what to expect. And I want to just be clear up front with everybody that comes in. Like, these are the standards that you need to be held to. Now, give us some examples of other industries that have tried to do this and
sure,
maybe succeeded, and how long it took, because we're thinking maybe a couple years and we might actually have an ANSI standard.
Yeah, it's I've been involved in past ones that sometimes it's taken up to 10 years. Again, the whole process, it revolves around everybody within that industry group having pretty much an equal say. And so everybody gets, to have their input. And at some point, the entire group has to come to an agreement on one thing. So if you know anything about group dynamics, that can be a challenge. So depending on, a little challenge. Depending on the size of the group, the focus of the group, the makeup of the group, it can have an effect. I know that originally when we talked about this, we're targeting 2 years. We're still kind of working with that goal in mind. And I hope that it's 2 years, but I also have been involved in some that take longer. I think for us that all of these different folks from all of these different companies around the wind industry that are working together on this initiative, I think for us it's the most important that it gets done well.
Yeah.
And if that takes longer than 2 years, then that might be a wheel. Probably hate me later for saying that, but I mean, it really does need to be done well. And one of the early things that had to happen that's taken a while is making sure that the representation in the group is such that no one group can overpower any other group within that dynamic. And we've just gotten that sorted out and have started through into work groups now.
Yeah, I'm a part of this. I get the email alerts and can jump in here and there and kind of add to it. And so what I see this is coming out as is like, what is a wind technician supposed to be before he even starts like day one? That's what we're talking about here, right? Like creating standards for guys to be held to so that they don't endanger themselves or other people. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, in part. I mean, that's a piece of it. But when we look at an industry consensus standard, like one that most of us in the wind industry have heard referred to is the ANSI Z359 standard. And that's where all of your fall protection stuff comes out of, that OSHA references and so on. And that's an industry consensus standard. And within that standard, it contains things like how the fall protection equipment has to be made, the tests that have to be passed, how those tests are done, so on and so forth. So what we're talking about here is quite literally the same thing, but applied to a wind technician. And so it wouldn't only be just for the technician to know what they should know to come in if an industry or in this particular case, a company is following that standard. It'll also help schools. The schools will now document that's been put together by an industry that says, hey, they need to know this, 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 and this. And then the schools have a clear idea of the industry's requirements. And so they'll know what to train, how to train it, how to assess it, all of those things. And again, it all comes from the industry. One of the things that we've seen across the country is there's many schools doing wind technician training, but not every school is teaching exactly the same thing. And so you get kind of a scatter, right? You could have one school that does really well in this and another school that doesn't even teach it per se. So that would help the schools. It also helps the employers as they look to evaluate good schools to pick up people from if people are going through the schools. The fourth way it actually helps, again, it's on the employer side. If they're hiring folks that aren't coming from a school, but they're coming from a different type of an industry, a lot of those skills are cross-transferable from industry to industry, and it will help the employer decide, okay, if they need to do this here, what did they do in a previous work experience that's really the same thing, and do they then have that experience?
So this allows not only schools but companies to have internal training programs that are set to a standard, an ANSI standard that all technicians should be leveled up to, so to speak.
Sure. And again, because it's consensus, it's probably a more minimum standard, right? Because you have to get everybody in the room to agree to,
we're talking about
how do you use and inspect a digital multimeter?
So we're talking about OEMs, we're talking about service providers. I mean, there's all kinds of people in that steering committee, and that's a lot of people to get together and say, okay, let's come up with these things. So, and you are the head of that, right? Like you are the steering committee chair. Is that what it is?
No, not in the steering committee. The steering committee is an additional committee that I'm a member on. I'm currently in year 2 of a 6-year term. And what that committee does is kind of guide subcommittees, We get final reviews on documents before it goes to the leadership within AWEA up at the upper echelons there. And we make the membership's voices heard to the leadership within AWEA. The committee for the ANSI standards is its own committee, and I am taking leadership roles in there. I'm chairing some of the working groups within that committee process. That's correct.
There's a lot to this, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you in here. And a lot of people just see AWEA as this thing they put on trade shows. But obviously what you're explaining is they're trying to do a lot more. Somebody had mentioned that this sounds like a GWO format. How do these things differ? What is GWO in comparison to an ANSI standard and what AWEA is trying to create?
Oh, that's a great question. So both of those are consensus standards. The GWO happens to be a consensus standard, and GWO, I should say, it stands for a global organization, but GWO happens to be a consensus standard that was developed primarily in Europe by OEMs, manufacturers, independent service providers, the same kinds of groups that we're talking about here in our country. Excuse me. And it's a standard that a lot of other countries have said, yeah, we could follow that. It's basic, but we'll follow it. And mostly because of a lack of anything else. In today's industries, a lot of us follow a quality management system. A lot of us are ISO, 9001 or some kind of quality process. And that process really kind of mandates that we look for other consensus documents to follow as best practice. And so for a lack of anything else out there, a lot of countries have accepted GWO. What we're talking about here is really the same thing, but ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute. So this is an American standard that addresses many of the things that GWO does.
Got it. And I remember going through that GWO training with you at KVCC, and there was a lot of just the basic stuff. And I felt like it was important, but we're talking about making our own standard here in the US, and it would probably look a lot like that with, some of our own literature to back it up. And then does a organization like OSHA then look at the ANSI standard that we hope to come up with and say, okay, yeah, we adopt this too? Is that the end goal? Or
I don't know that that's necessarily our goal, but OSHA certainly has the ability to look out there, because what we're talking about with our ANSI standard is what's considered to be a best practice, where the industry has said this is really the best way to do it. OSHA can look at that and say, wow, that's pretty good. If we don't have something specific, they could reference it. And we've got many examples of where OSHA has done that, around ANSI Z359 and some of these other performance standards. And so it's not impossible that would happen. I don't think that's the primary goal at this point with the process. I think it's more about what is a wind technician, and furthermore, what should an entry-level technician be able to do?
Okay. So for me, I'm wondering, and this is just me wondering, because when I started, it really wasn't standardized at all. And I started in 08, and you could see some of this too. I mean, I remember you talking about you spent some time with Furlander, and you had went overseas and spent time with them. And so you got to see the European thing early on. And anyway, there's no, is there any form of license you think that a wind tech would ever have? And is this kind of even related at all? It doesn't seem to be related at all, but maybe it's going somewhere like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think the two are actually related. There's certainly no thought process about the best practice requiring some kind of a licensure within it, at least that I've heard.
You have to pass or something, like an electrician. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, well, we operate under power generation too. So there's some of the rules and regulations are differ a little bit than somebody operating perhaps within a manufacturing plant per se, installing equipment. And that's probably a topic for a different podcast. Um, but I think at the heart of the matter, we're really just trying to put together a consensus standard that says this is the minimum training requirements and skills that a wind technician should need. Now, a company could choose to say, look, that's not enough. And our company policy is we want to go higher than that. So they would take the standard and then build upon that vertically within their own organization. And there's nothing that prevents a company from doing that.
Yeah, I worked for companies like that said this is the basic standard, but this is where we're setting the bar. And even other companies that you had to work alongside, you said you got to adopt the one that was the highest level of protection for you. And I always liked that. Always felt safe. We've come a long way, man. We've come a long, long way from when I started. I know that, and then before then. So I think we're going in the right direction. We had a comment here. I don't know what it is or what it means, but it says, what happened to BZEE certification with the attempt to standardize the industry? Do you know what that is, Tom?
Yep, I do. We are a BZE school. That's kind of where we started, and then we brought that training program back from Europe. Actually, had to add to it to make it fit the expectations here in the U.S. So there was an example already of a kind of a standard within the training used in Europe, and they're quite large. And if you go to their website, they show maps of where all their schools are. I know to date they've trained over 50,000 wind technicians worldwide.
Oh, wow.
And they've been in existence since 2001. All of our graduates come out where they can have an opportunity to get the BZE certification. Not everybody gets it. It's still pretty tough in its own right. So they're alive and well. I work with the BZE. I'm on their advisory committees. So, we understand that around the world it's working, and it works pretty well. Here, it meets a minimum, or it has a minimum set of standards to it, but we've found that we've had to train beyond those to be accepted in the industry.
Okay, cool. I'm learning something here myself. I didn't even know what that was. Um, that sounds quite large. That's a lot of people. I have to check that out, man. My I think biggest goal for the conversation here today and talking about workforce standardization is really to just bring a sense of safety to those who enter into the industry, and give a standard for everybody to say, hey, look, this is the minimum requirements for everybody, and this is what we need to uphold. Sounds like the committee that are on the same page as well. My biggest fear is we pull guys off the street. We say the street, but pull them off of some other type of job, and they come in and they have all these bad habits or things that they used to do at this said company and all that, and we don't have something to show them. And I've been around long enough so where I saw so many different companies, and I worked for great companies, seeing great stuff in my personal opinions, but there's other companies that really lack a standardization, and it trickles down to all those that they work with. So I think all service providers should have this standard, because they're technically the ones that are usually scrambling around trying to find the hands, because there's point in times in our industry where it's growing so rapidly that we'll just take anybody. So I think that's my biggest thought about why we need to create those standards. But also, you touch base on the schools. You're right, man. Like everybody, and then their mom and then their grandma created a wind tech school, and I love the fact that you guys at KVCC have been around for a long time now. What is it, 6 to 10 years, something like that?
Now, this is our 11th year, so
11 years.
we're graduating our 18th class next week.
And you have an extraordinary placement program, I think over 98% or something. And when I visited your campus, I just knew that you were doing it right. But I have visited others that aren't. And I would really like for them to be able to level up and for everyone to level up. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I'm sure we're going to get some students looking at this. Can you tell us a little bit about what it takes for a WIN program like yours to be an accredited program? A lot of us have questions about that. What does that even mean, and how do you get there?
Accreditation, I'll make the most basic definition. Basically, accreditation is peer reviewed process and content to make sure that you're actually delivering what the peer group would say you're supposed to be delivering.
Who's
is
it like something that you
create,
or
for us? Yeah, I mean, we're a community college, so the college itself operates under what's called the Higher Learning Commission, and that's a group of other peers, college professors, administrators, and so on that go around, and it's an audit, right? It's a very similar process to an ISO audit or an ASET audit for some of our trades program. Trade schools out there operate under ASET. I do a lot of curriculum review for ASET. And so accreditation is nothing more than saying, hey, look, we've been doing is been opened up to this group, this accredited body, and they verified that we're doing what we're supposed to and that we're teaching the way we're supposed to, and so on. So for my program, my accreditation actually comes from the BZEE, and we carry a little bit of weight because we're also the AWEA Seal of Approval schools, one of the AWEA Seal of Approval schools. I don't know if you remember a few years back, we attempted to put together what they called the Seal of Approval, which again, it's AWEA being an industry group. It's a trades group. It was a crack at some kind of a consensus on what those entry-level skills should be, and it was basically a list. And then every school that wanted to apply for it had to send in examples of all of the ways that they taught those skills, and we did that. I think our submission was over 1,500 pages. But so there is some horsepower. Now, AWEA doesn't accredit or certify, but they certainly carry some weight in the industry. So a seal of approval means something. Other schools operate, differently. So they could be a 2-year. As you know from visiting ours, it's a 24-week program. Mm-hmm. Other schools might do a 2 years associate degree in electrical with some of the renewables sprinkled in there and operate under their accreditation, maybe Higher Learning Commission, maybe something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what the industry is saying is look, if we can put together a standard that says we as the industry are looking for this, and this, it will help those schools come up with more relevant, more focused, directed training that ultimately we want these graduates to be job ready when they show up at the job site, right?
Yeah, everybody wants that.
And we want, yeah, and really from an employer standpoint, we don't want to be sending them back to school to learn something that they didn't know they had to learn. So I think it helps everybody in that manner. And anybody that it operates under a quality management, like we operate under quality management here, following an ANSI standard is good. That's part of our process of continuous improvement.
So when you talk about quality management, you're talking about like ISO 9001, that kind of stuff?
Correct. Okay. Yep, that kind of stuff. Yeah, basically it's we say what we do what we say, and we allow a third party to audit that.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, we say what we do what we say, and then we let people come see if we're doing it all.
That's right.
I like that. Well, I think that definitely holds you to a standard, and it's amazing that how much stuff goes in the back end of this. And to think about this industry as a whole, how big it is, And to think about like the small players that we have in it, who are by no means actually small in what they do, but organizations like AWEA, that I think AWEA only has like 50 people in it, but yet what they do is they organize other individuals within the organization, and then they get things together like what you're working on with workforce standardization, and you guys can accomplish big things, or we hope, right? I mean, if not, we have all the time put in and we don't have anything come out, and it's going to be a little bit of a disappointment. But what do you think some of these standards at the heart of it are really going to benefit the industry? How do you think it's all going to benefit?
I work with a lot of professionals from a lot of the different wind companies from around the country.
Yeah.
Within AWEA. And the one thing that it always impresses me is that this industry is maturing very, very quickly. I know as well as you do.
Like compare it to something, man. I mean, because like solar, I think we talked about solar, and it's like, in my opinion, it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think there's other industries that do too. We do some training in other industries, and they're just that deal with height. Telecom, yeah, I don't. They're not all bad, but I mean, there's certainly, when you compare the two safety, it's a culture thing, right? It's a safety culture thing. We just don't see, or at least I don't overall. Now there are outliers, but overall, I don't see the same detail within telecom as I do in wind. And I mean, they're working hard at it. NWSA and some of those other bodies have come together to really put together some good stuff. And so I'm not knocking them at all. I just think that wind has come further quicker. And I think a part of that is the professionals that the companies have put into health and safety. A lot of companies that are big players in wind are also, significant players in other forms of energy production, such as nuclear or gas, oil, the offshore oil and gas industry. And you look at those industries, they're highly regulated, big on safety. They've got lots of years of experience. And by moving those individuals into the wind industry to help those same companies, we're benefiting from all of that experience and knowledge that they've learned in relevant industries in the wind industry. So we're moving very, very quickly towards a very safety regulated industry.
I like that. I always kind of thought of that as a bad thing, honestly. Like I always thought, oh, you guys are bringing these guys in that don't know about wind. But that's the positive side. And I think that you're right, man. I mean, if you get these big organizations that have been dealing with power generation for a long time, like even if it's nuclear or geothermal, whatever it is, and they're coming in here and can help us move forward even faster, I think that's the way to go. How do you see this offshore wind market coming in? Obviously we got to have some help from people in other countries that have done this before. Do you think that that's going to kind of speed up our standardization process and maybe make it a little bit better? Because that's a huge influx of people that are knowledgeable in their own right and have these other standards. And
yeah, it's interesting. We have some subcommittees within AWEA already that are dealing with some of the offshore. I mean, it's too early for me, and I'm not actively involved in a lot of those committees. I kind of pop in and out, but one thing's for sure. I mean, we've seen that already off of the East Coast, and there's more coming quickly. So, companies that are in business and they're multi-million-dollar profit companies, they're going to move forward. They find ways to do that. I think for us, it's our work is cut out for us, and from the standpoint that we need to ensure worker safety first and foremost. We need to represent the industry. It's a great new market. It's got a lot of advantages to us, with location of wind farms next to large load centers. And I think, the government, the federal regulating agencies have certainly reached out and said, look, we know we have to help out with this in some way. How can we get involved? And we're seeing a lot of that involvement in a very constructive way, working together as an industry and a regulating agency to help understand each other's pain points and to work on collaborative solutions.
So
I don't know where it's going to end up, but it's coming fast.
It is coming fast. I think I shared some stuff on the Tower Climbing Grease Monkeys the other day about a deal being cut, and I think it was off of I forget what it was. It was, I don't know. Anyway, we got a question coming in here from Tony. Let's read it and let's see what he says. Would an agreed upon industry standard across the board change the qualification and certs needed before hiring? How would this apply to the person who's no training, get hired, the good old boy system, and companies need to train to the national certification of the government? Sorry, I suck. But I get what he's saying. I get what Tony's saying. He's like, how would this affect people just coming off the street, I guess? And could they still get jobs? I would say so. I think this company just has to hold them to that standard and get them trained up before they actually let them go out, Right now.
I think we're talking two different things here. I mean, certification and a consensus standard are two different things, and they're not, one doesn't imply the other. The ANSI standard isn't a certification. It's just an agreed upon set of performance, tests, training, whatever that case may be.
Right.
A body that can certify may choose to follow that standard as the basis for that certification. It certainly wouldn't prevent a company from saying, okay, we're going to a training or a certification provider that trains to this standard, and we're only going to, let's say, hire people that pass X certification, right? That would be an example of a company wanting to go above and beyond what the rest of the best practice is. As far as like hired on the good old boy system being trained, again, I think it's up to each company on how they choose to train and select for promotion or hire, what those qualifications are. But going back to earlier in the podcast, like you said, the standard would then clearly show a pathway for that company to develop or train that individual or assess their skills.
Yeah, it definitely is a two-part thing. The standard is the standard, and if we're coming up with a certification or some kind of license, that's a separate deal. And obviously,
totally separate conversation.
Yeah, the standard is going to be drawn upon, if that certifying, company or whatever it is, organization decides to adopt it, which I'm guessing they would if we spent all this time getting an ANSI standard and all that. So, Tom, one of the things that I'm really impressed by you is just your knowledge of the general, like, I guess for lack of better words, rules. Can you talk about like the different organizations? Like, talk about, for the guys that don't know much about OSHA, the guys that don't know much about ANSI, the guys that don't know much about like the electrical stuff. Like, what are the big players in the game, and how do they affect us in the wind industry?
Okay, well, OSHA is a federal, regulatory type industry. They're there to ensure that every worker, they have a right to a healthful and safe workplace, free of injuries or things that are likely. And what they do is really look to say, this is the minimum set of rules that you have to follow as an employer. And there's even some stuff, if you read it, that, the employee's supposed to be doing too. But that's all the minimum type stuff. Then you have organizations like ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, You've got other organizations out there that can write standards. Ultimately, ISO at the international level, which the U.S. Belongs to, has standards. And so what standards are is beyond the minimum requirements of a regulatory body like OSHA. Okay. These are industry best practice. And so, okay, we're complying with OSHA, but let's say Tom's company and my company, we don't want to just meet the minimum. We want to go beyond that. And so we're going to look at other, world-class companies around us and see how they're treating something like accessing the nacelle through the tower systems ladders, or how are they doing work on the roof, or how are they doing the construction, and find out what they're doing the best and then copy that. All right. And so that's what a best practice is. And then we can go on that. And let's say, for example, Tom's imaginary company, I say, okay, for the most part, we're going to follow these industry best practices. However, in these areas, I think we need to go more. And that's where your company policies come in. And that's usually a lot of that can be dictated by your risk management, your insurance underwriters, and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I know I can't be the only one. I always get a little confused, between like just all the acronyms and stuff that get thrown around within standardization stuff like OSHA and NFPE. We always refer to NFPE 70E, like we refer to all these standards for equipment, but then also workforce standards, like what are we expected to do, and what do we do inside of a confined space, and all this stuff. And I remember going to KVC and just like bookmarking a ton of new organizations that I didn't even know existed. And my goal here is to just maybe even spark some interest in some people and have them, investigate some of these things that we've talked about here. One of my questions for you is, how do you think that a guy maybe that picks up on this podcast, or is a part of the wind industry, the tower climbing grease monkeys, how do you think they can give back to the industry? And is there a way for them to get involved in some of this stuff that we've been talking about, maybe standardization and maybe having a voice in it? Obviously, like the group that you guys work with, like, continues to expand. And as far as I knew, like it can expand as big as it wants. We just have to have a certain level of involvement, right? We can't have one set of people, outweigh the other. Is that right?
That's correct. ANSI ensures that you don't have a big gorilla group in the room that can just, have their way. They have a majority say. And so the group can grow as large as it needs to. There's really no size limit per se, but you are absolutely right. The makeup of the group has to remain balanced.
Right.
As far as somebody picking up on the podcast and wanting to get involved, one of the things that I've talked with other members in AWIA about is we would love to have more of the actual technician involvement in standards creations around workforce training, right? I mean, who knows the job better than the technician themselves? And we also understand that there's some challenges with that, because technicians are busy, and when they're not at work, they want to have family time or a life. And so it's kind of a challenge. How do we do that? What I will say, go ahead.
Sorry, it's a challenge for me to even participate in it. So, but I know that I want to at least give them the opportunity, if they really are passionate about it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if there are technicians out there, first of all, we would love to have some input in the committee levels. And there's probably a couple of ways realistically. One would be, can we, as a technician, can I get my company to send me to these meetings? But I will say, and that may not work. I don't know. I can't speak for each company, but I do know that the majority of the companies that our technicians work for are represented in the committee. So perhaps within those companies, they could get to their supervisor, their site lead, whoever that is, and say, hey, I'd really like to have some input, and get that worked up through the organization to the people that are on that committee, and they can have a voice through those people.
Yeah, so just work through the chain of command. Let it be known your concerns. Let it be known the things that you think should be a standard for technicians, and then those reps can then pass it along. Because yeah, it's really tough to get everybody out to, what are you guys meeting up in San Diego? I think in February. Um,
Yeah.
it gets costly, to send a bunch of people out there. I'm going to do my best to keep people informed and updated, especially after this podcast. Just be more in tune with how it's going, where we want the standards to go, and then sharing some of the information that I can share, and giving people some feedback on, how it's coming along. And we all want to be proud of a standard that we create, and give it give it the best chance possible to survive and be as effective as possible. It's the way I can see
Absolutely.
it. It's cool to see where we've come from and where we're going. And um, I I'm really just thankful that people put in this time. I just want to be clear here, like these people that are a part of these organizations, they're not getting paid to be a part of it. They're simply doing it. And Tom, you can speak to that. Like you told me why you're a part of this, and you told me why. You said basically, if I'm going to complain about it, I got to do something to change it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally for me, at this stage in my career, I want to leave into retirement knowing that I've made a difference. That what I did helped and it made a difference. And I teach and my staff teaches because we like to change people's lives. And so, I'm pretty passionate about doing something that will make a difference in an industry that I care greatly about. And not just wind. I mean, it's renewables, and we could hash that whole argument out later. But I'm passionate about renewables. I'm passionate about people being able to go home the way they came to work. And I'm passionate about changing people's lives from the standpoint of teaching them a skill that they can use to then support their family and the things that they want to do. So that's why I spent nights away from my primary job working on committee stuff and doing some really wild travel schedules and things like that, because I believe it's important.
Well, man, you're doing it, and I commend you for doing it. I look at what you do, and I go, man, how does he have time to do that? And I'm thankful for it. You bring a lot to this industry. You've taken things from your past, and you've brought them in here to help this industry. And then you've also taken, things that you do in the current, like with your fire department in your local area, and just having that knowledge and bringing it into your training program. I know for a fact that the waves that you've created from right there at KBCC and the people that have left there, all those 18 graduating classes, it makes an impact. And you've made an impact on me. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. You've taught me a lot. And even if that's how you get paid, which is, just people being like, hey man, thanks for doing that, because I didn't have the time to do it. Maybe that's something. We're getting quite a few more comments in here. We've got one from Eric. I'll put it up here on the screen. His basic question is more towards like what Tony was talking about. Is there a level that we could get to where we just come up with that standard of, how to become the top dog and all that, like the different levels. And, Eric, we talked about that, and really the standards are one thing. And then, creating a license or some kind of accreditation is another thing. The standards are going to maybe help us get to that point if that's where the industry is trying to go. But right now it's all based on the individual companies. We've got another question here from Lucas, who's also, I guess, involved in this quite a bit. He says, how would the AWEA standard and cert compare to the ASE certificate in the automotive industry?
Yeah, again, I mean, the standard is a performance, tells us what to teach, how to assess type thing, or what skills. automotive service excellence, which, I was involved in the automotive industry for sure. Again, that's a licensure / certification that draws upon some standards that were created within the automotive industry. But it's a separate issue. The standard or the consensus, document called the standard doesn't extend, let's say, a certification or a license with it. It's just it's a guideline. It's a best practice. But certainly, I mean, who knows where this industry will be in 10, 15, 20 more years. Excuse me. If the industry decides, like you said, to move into that direction, then the standard becomes even more important, because it is something to look at from a certification basis to say, look, you got to follow at least this to be certified in that area. But I don't believe that that's actually what we're talking about currently. It could mature that way, as other industries have done over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obviously a topic that these guys are wanting to talk about. I know I bring up standards and things. I brought it up on the group a few weeks back, man, and people like got on me like, what are you trying to create a union? I'm like, nope, that's not even what I talked about. But thanks for bringing that up, and making me that guy. But that's not what we're talking about here. I think it's a whole other conversation about how to create certificates and how people level up in companies. But right now, guys, you got to deal with the companies that you're dealing with. And if they're not treating you right, you're an at-will employee. You got to go where you got to go, and that's just how it is right now. And I think a lot of people are going to think about, how do we get to that point or all that. And I'd love to have that conversation too, but that's not this particular conversation about standards. So, Tom, we about hit an hour, and I didn't even realize it just flew by. Do you want to wrap this thing up with any closing comments?
Like I said, it as a member of this process within AWEA, it would be great to have more direct input from the technician as we work to develop a set of workforce training standards. And I don't, what that mechanism looks like. I have a feeling it's probably better if they work through their company, leadership to try to get to the person that's actually involved. Because as I said, most of the companies out there that employ our WinTechs are represented within WEA in some shape or form. And there's quite a few companies involved in the ANSI committee. You've seen the list. So it's a lot of the big players are in there. So somehow, some way within their company, getting their voice up or having the information disseminated down to them as to what's being worked on and talked about, I think would be helpful. And I mean, I think a standard is a natural step in progression as this industry matures. If we look at other industries that have started out, they've grown rapidly, they start following quality. Eventually they all get to some kind of a standard. Call it what you want. ANSI standard. We started here with a set of SOGs, standard operating guidelines. Say what it is we're going to do, and then do what we say we were going to do, type thing. Yep. And a standard is just another term for that, right? So I think it's a natural step in the maturity of the industry, and I think it'll only help us get better, and it'll help all the ancillary, like the schools and everybody else, understand what it is that the industry is looking for the technician.
Absolutely, man. You said it best. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom. And thank you for doing what you do, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Neal. I enjoyed it.
Well, you guys heard it here, man. Tom is definitely an expert in what he's talking about, and I wish him all the best. He's got a killer program at KVCC. If you should, feel the need to check it out, we'll put a link in here, and you can go check that out. I've been to the school. School's awesome. I enjoy myself there. They've got their own, turbines inside, and they also have, this Furlander fleet that they take care of and they maintain. And so it's just Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and it's in Kalamazoo Valley. in Kalamazoo. So anyway, it's a nice place. And if you guys are interested in being a part of creating this standard, please talk to your company representatives and tell them what your interests are. They'll give you feedback, and you can give them feedback, and then we can create a standard that'll last and we can all be proud of. I appreciate you guys joining in. This has been a fun podcast. And if you guys ever want to join this, you just hit us up. Let us know if you want to join in, and we'd be happy to have you and to talk about the things that you want to talk about. This is a podcast for wind turbine technicians, created by a wind turbine technician, and we hope to bring you guys value every day. So until next time, we'll see you guys later. Later, Grease Monkey Nation.